Welcome back to the Juan Palomino Breakthrough Podcast. I'm Jenna Palomino, and I'm here with my husband and coach, Juan Palomino.
Hey, everyone.
Today, we're talking about attention so many high-capacity leaders quietly wrestle with. What do you do when the environment, role, or relationships around you no longer fit who you're becoming? We're calling this one When You've Outgrown the Room You're In.
I like it. When we started talking about this topic, I was thinking about how many people, really reach this point and they don't have the language for it. So you don't feel bitter. You're not trying to prove anything to anybody, but something in your spirit just starts to shift. I call it what used to feel like home now feels a little tight. I think I've coined it before. I feel like a lion in a cage, just walking back and forth. So the room didn't change, but you did. And let me just say this, it's not pride, it's growth.
Yeah, so let's talk about that feeling when you start to sense that misalignment. What are some signs that someone might be outgrowing the room that they're in or that cage?
What I felt, I'm going to go to when I felt this. It's a deep restlessness. That restlessness is something that you can't shake off. For me, it was a lack of challenge. I felt like I had hit my capacity where I was at. And so I began to look at things outside of my lane. And so as I ran into things outside of my lane, because what my job description was written in it, I was good at it, and I was doing good, and things were great. But then I felt restless, like I wasn't being challenged. So I felt constricted, and I wanted to be challenged outside of my job description. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think you're being vague.
Okay.
So let's talk about...
Here she goes.
Yeah, because I think that you're afraid to step on some toes.
I'm not.
Okay,
Come on, girl. Bring it.
Well, we used to be church planters, right? And so along with being a church planter, we had the freedom to do a lot of stuff.
Flexibility.
Right. And so we didn't have any red tape.
Okay.
Right. And so then...
no restrictions.
Right. And so then you became an executive pastor. And with that, you came to a church that had been established for...
almost 60 years.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's different.
Yeah.
And so when you come to a church that they've already been doing things the way that they've been doing, then that changes things.
Right.
And I think, too, with our history, we've been to mega churches, a couple different mega churches, and we've seen what had worked. And so then we tried bringing it, like we knew, right? Like, hey, this has worked. And so, because being your spouse, but I also felt the same way that you did, right? Because we came to a smaller church and was like, hey, I see this and I know that this works. Like, why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we doing
Right.
this?
And for context, we were talking about mega church, big church to little church. Let's get context there. So the church that we came from, before we church planted, was about 3,000 people on the weekend. And then we church planted and we got up to about 60, 65 people in our backyard, which was awesome. And even though I had a job description at the mega church, I had a lot of flexibility, and I felt like there weren't any restrictions on us, because nobody at that church knew what we were doing anyways. Does that make sense? Like, they knew there's this vagueness to the capital C church. Actually, let me rephrase that. There's a vagueness to the church that we were working at. They know that we do a recovery ministry, but they don't know the ins and outs of it. Right? It's like, oh, it's a ministry. You go do that, and you do what you do. And so even though I had supervision, there's a lot of vagueness in that.
I think finances come into play with that.
It does, but I'm saying like the structure of it. I'm saying like building a leadership team.
Mm-hmm.
There's all kinds of other things that we have the flexibility to do. Does that make sense? There's not a box that they say, hey, go play in this box and here's the parameters. When it comes to a recovery ministry or church planting, it felt the same, though it was very different. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Because the recovery ministry, it's not on a Sunday, it's on a Friday.
Right.
So there's some differences, but still a lot of similarities.
Some people can mistake it for a church inside of a church, unfortunately.
Yeah, but what I'm saying though, honey, is we went from being entrepreneurs
right.
and starting something fresh at two different places, then coming to a place where here is your job description now.
Right, and you stay within these lines.
Yes, and you have to stay within these lines.
Yeah.
And there's no wiggle room.
Yeah.
And so that, for me, because I've been doing that previously to this job, I'm grateful for it. I've been doing it for 3 years. There was no job description per se. There was a title, and we kind of went based on what we had experienced, things that we were learning, where we're growing, where we're looking at things and saying, I don't want that. I'm not interested in that. Let's do it this way. There was more flexibility, and we were let's call it the end all be all, meaning we had a quick meeting, we discussed it, and we decided pivot or don't pivot. And so when you said there's less red tape, that's what you mean. There's not we had a board, right? Or an elder board, but they were pretty much behind us 100%. We weren't doing these crazy unbiblical decisions that we were making. That's not it.
Right.
What we're saying is, we were in essence starting from fresh.
Yep.
And just imagining, using our imagination and our creativity, all those things.
Right. And so you came into this position as an executive pastor, and then you were put into this lane, right? And my question is, how long did it take you to figure out or acknowledge that something had shifted? And do you think that people wait too long to
acknowledge that shift?
Yeah.
More frustration. So I remember having built up this frustration, and it didn't take long for me. You sensed it, you saw it, because I would come home and talk to you about it. And I began to harbor resentment towards my boss, towards things that I wanted to change, but I would buck against the system, buck against the red tape. Oh, we got to ask these people, and we got to pray about it, and we have to go to the elder board and talk to them. And in other words, the decision couldn't be made just right then and there when it was so obvious. And so, again, bucking against that brought a lot of frustration. And I remember getting to the point where initially there was a lot of change at first that I was permitted. I came to a church and launched a couple different ministries, right? We launched the recovery ministry, and I was able to relaunch the guest services ministry at our church. That's all the way from the streets to the seats, and implement some good changes, because we came with a fresh eye, a fresh perspective to this new place, which is an older church, but with a different perspective.
So I want to take you back, because we're talking about the time when you came from a church planter into executive pastor, but what about the time when you were recovery ministry leader and then you went into being a campus pastor? You grew out of that role of a recovery ministry leader into a campus pastor. Did you feel any fear or like guilt of loyalty leaving that position in the recovery ministry? Because you were over, there was hundreds of people in that recovery ministry. So did you feel any of that? Because there could be, like in the business world, right? There could be somebody who's in this position now who feels like they're outgrowing this position that they're in, but they're afraid to leave because of maybe these feelings.
Yeah, I think fear, depending on how you look at it, when you're going into something new, there's always going to be a what if. But what I did, which I'm grateful for, is I spoke to a mentor and put a plan together. Mm-hmm. And that mentor was the senior pastor at that church. I spoke to him and said, hey, his name is Rusty George. I said, Pastor Rusty, I said, don't pigeonhole me in the recovery ministry. Put me in a leadership pipeline and think of me as when the church grows and you guys begin to launch churches or campuses, like, let me know, like, equip me, like, think of me, prepare me. And he was like, yeah, let's do it. But I had to also do the preparation. I also had to look at my replacement. And so at the same time, while we were leading the ministry, growing the recovery ministry, and I was working on some things to become more, quote unquote, pastoral outside of the recovery ministry, meeting with Rusty and meeting with other pastors that were Sunday pastors, weekend pastors. Does that make sense? Instead of Friday recovery pastors.
Right.
I felt confident with the game plan that we put together in order for me to go from this place to the next thing. And so that gave me confidence to move on and begin to tackle the new position, which was, like you mentioned, going and now leading a church, a campus at a movie theater, back in Canyon Country when we were in Santa Clarita Valley.
Yeah. So
the loyalty piece, let me touch on that. So the loyalty piece is something that obviously you're going to miss people that you've invested time, invested quality time, and gone through different life stages and, transformation in their life. But I think everyone knows and has an understanding, and God does this beautiful thing where he begins to, move you into a different direction, and everyone senses it. At least the people that are closest to you kind of go, I think one day Juan or Jenna are going to leave. God is preparing them for something else, And so that's what happened. I felt that that's what happened with us. There was a shift, and we were having conversations with our leadership team in that ministry. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. We're saying, hey guys, like, pray, like, which one of you is interested to take the leadership role? Because we're praying also to shift into in the future. Now, we didn't give them a timeline. We were just like hands open saying, when God says go, then we're ready to go. But we also want to make sure that we don't just abandon ship.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so I think that we did a good job of transitioning.
Right. And I agree too, because especially in that position, if you make the ministry about yourself and then you leave, mm-hmm. people will get upset. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I think you did a great job of having different speakers come and teach during that ministry. And so people weren't used to always seeing you up on stage.
That's another thing. Yeah.
That's besides the point though. But let's name the hard part.
Okay.
So outgrowing the room doesn't always mean the room was bad, right?
Right.
But so why does it still feel painful to leave?
Again, it's relationships. Mm-hmm. It's relationships. And the other thing is we could have done that ministry with our eyes closed.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Like we seriously could just show up on a Friday and we keep mentioning Friday night because that's the night that the ministry would meet, and we could do it with our eyes closed. But the other part of that is also, okay, that could become very repetitive, at least the type of personality that I am. And then boredom sits in and I'm not being challenged.
Right.
Which means that if I'm not being challenged, I'm not growing. Hence, the people around me are not being challenged and they're not growing. And so things become stagnant. Sure, things become second nature, but you begin to coast. And, my pastor mentor today says, hey, if you're coasting, Juan, remember, you're going downhill. So I don't want to coast. I don't want to just coast and just be comfortable. I know that if I'm growing and I'm facing my fears of what's next, and we're going from, one blessing to the next blessing, then it's going to help not only us grow, but it's going to help those around me grow. So again, the fear is sure, like, hey, I'm leaving my comfortable nest. I got to get out, I got to go fly. But remember, it gives the opportunity. If you're a leader, it gives the opportunity for others to grow into your position. They're not replacing you. In essence, you're promoting them. I always say this, don't delegate, empower people. Those are different words. You can delegate or you can empower. So that means that if I'm looking to grow and move on to the next thing, that gives an opportunity for that vacancy to be filled with somebody new. And that's what discipleship is. If we're talking about what the kingdom is about, it's about discipleship. It's not about me holding the position as a lead pastor, or holding a position as a ministry leader, or holding a position as a CEO, or whatever you do in business. The objective is to multiply. The objective is to disciple, to duplicate yourself. That is leadership. John Maxwell talks about the 5 levels of leaders, and the 5th level, which is the highest level, is the leader that is secure, the leader that is confident, but the leader that multiplies himself. A leader that is confident in who he is, his identity is about creating other leaders. And so that's the type of leader that I hope I can, be and become and continue to grow.
Yeah, and I think sometimes staying small to protect comfort will cost you your calling.
That's the other thing too. Going back to, I mentioned Pastor Rusty. You know what he told me one day, honey? I don't know if I told you this. We were having a conversation in his office, and he said, "You know what, Juan?" He goes, if you replace yourself here, in other words, if you duplicate yourself, you'll always have a job here. Yeah. I mean, how powerful is that? Instead, in corporate America, when I had a job, it was like, oh, I can't let anybody know everything that I do here. Because gatekeeping, because then they're going to do it better than I do. And it's fear-based. Yeah. But that's not leadership. Right. If you're leading out of fear, then something's wrong with you, right? There's some insecurities there that you need to work on. Sure, make yourself indispensable, but not out of fear. The motive behind it is to say, how can I make my position, my department, my ministry, my church, whatever God has blessed me with, how can I make it better? How can I help it grow? And what's the answer? Help people grow. Right. Invest into them. See what their goals are. Ask them, how do they want to grow? What are some areas that they want to grow, achieve, and invest in them? I've learned, and this is why I believe that, God has promoted us from position to the next position to the next thing, because we like to start things. We like to hand them off. And again, not for our own glory, but it's like, this is what we're taught to do. If I look at it biblically, Matthew 28:19-20, go and make more disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And then it says, verse 20, and teach them everything I have instructed you to do, and I'll be with you to the end of the age. Okay, so there's a promise there that God is with me no matter what I'm doing and where I'm going. I just got to trust in him that if I do what he's told me to do, which is go and make more disciples, then God's got my back. He'll take me from blessing to blessing, from glory to glory.
Yeah, amen. And I think a lot of people listening are holding tension right now. They're waking up to who they're becoming, but the people around them don't see it yet. So what would you say to the person who's scared to take the next step?
So we're all scared. I'll be honest. Let's just be transparent.
Because sometimes it can feel selfish, right?
Well, again, everything starts with motive.
Yeah.
And sometimes it is selfish. Sometimes you're thinking, hey, I want to do this, I want to accomplish that, but this, I feel restricted. Like I said earlier, there has to be a conversation. You need to have conversations, especially with those that are leading you. Okay. I've been blessed. I will say this. I've been blessed with leaders where my conversation initially with them is upfront. I've learned to be honest up front, to be open, to be transparent. I keep saying that over and over, but it's a win. When I interviewed, for example, for this position that I'm in today, I said, hey, I'm looking at the job description here, and to be honest, I fit 60% of it. 60% of it, I go, I can nail this. I feel that confident. But the other 40%, I'm going to need help with this. I'm going to need whatever it is, any type of education, training, this and that. But I was up front, and they blessed me with the opportunity. They said, yeah, because of your skill set in this area, this other 60%, and I'm just throwing a number out there. It could have been a little bit higher. Or less. Don't ask too many questions out. But I was open and transparent about it. I said, here's my heart. I want to reach more people. I believe in what Jesus Christ said, to go and reach more people, to make more disciples. And so that opened the opportunity, that opened the door for me to use my gifts, that is my strengths, and to say also, here's where I'm vulnerable. Here's my weaknesses. Can you guys take me as I am, but I'm not going to stay there. Help me grow in these areas. And that opened the door. And so know what your strengths are. Open up about what your deficiencies are or what your weaknesses are. Mm-hmm. And don't baloney anybody. Don't BS anybody about, I could do this, I could do that. Because then when you don't do it, then, the truth's going to come out.
Yeah. Sometimes God grows us quietly before he moves us publicly.
Yes. Oh, does he?
And that gap in between, that's where faith is forged. You don't have to rush, but you also don't have to shrink.
Okay. So here's what I'll say again. You're going to hear me. It's going to be like a broken record, but this is it. And I had to hear it over and over again. No matter what the job title is, no matter what the opportunity is, okay, I've always prayed and asked God and said, you know what, Lord, if this is where you want me to be, then make it seamless. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be open and have a conversation with them. I'm going to talk about what I've done. I want to talk about what my aspirations are, what my dreams are. And if this is the place you want me to be, and I could be a fit and I can help, then let's make it happen. Then bless me, open the door. But if it's not, and I'm going to be more of a burden, or I'm going to be frustrated, and I'm not going to be able to grow or be able to use my gifts and talents there, then close the door.
Yeah.
Close the door. And he has.
Mm-hmm.
One of the blessings is knowing what your gifts and talents are, but also what fulfills you. What is the thing that fulfills you so that you can actually use that or pursue that? What fulfills you?
Yeah.
So I had this conversation with my boss when I was frustrated, when I felt constricted. And I said, hey, here are the things that I feel that I've been beating a drum nice and loud and saying, hey, here's the changes that I'd like to see. Here's some things where nothing's happened. And that's why you see me frustrated in meetings. I'm not participating. I'm not smiling as big as I used to be. Here's what's going on, because he noticed it. Mm-hmm. And the people around you notice it. Mm-hmm. And so instead of bringing others down, I would say, send an email or a phone call, make a phone call immediately and meet with those that love you, that trust you, that hired you, mm-hmm. that believe in you, and be open, honest, and transparent, and just say, hey, here are the things that are frustrating me. And here's what I would say. This is a simple way. You're on the right bus, but you're on the wrong seat. Okay. Now, you may be on the wrong bus now. How do you know you're on the wrong bus? Meaning, I'm done here. How do I know when I need to move and transition? Okay. There's two questions that you have to ask yourself. Number one, do I trust the leadership? Mm. Do I trust the leadership? The second question is, are you hopeful that things will change? In other words, once you have the conversation and you don't just sit back and do nothing about it, or you don't talk to the person that's leading you, your supervisor, manager, your boss, whoever, and have a conversation and say, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what I like to see change. Here's this and that. If you're not hopeful that things are going to move forward, if you answer no to one of those two, it's time to transition. Mm. It's time to go somewhere else. Mm. But if you say, hey, the first one is yes, and then the second question is, I'm not too hopeful, but you haven't had a conversation yet, or you haven't talked about like, hey, here's what's restricting me, or here's how I feel frustrated, then it's on you. But once you've had the conversation and you trust the management, you trust the leadership, and nothing happens, then you have your answer. Mm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But number one, the first question is, do I trust the leadership? If you're automatically saying, oh, I don't trust the leadership at all, then you have your answer. It's time to move on.
Yeah.
Because how do you go to work when you don't trust?
Right.
When you don't trust the leaders, when you don't trust your boss. Mm-hmm. It's sad to say, but you have your answer there.
I mean, I think sometimes the call of God on your life will lead you out of the rooms that once felt safe, not because you failed, but because you've grown, right? So there's a nudge. So sometimes you will trust the leadership, but sometimes God will also call you out of that position as well, right? So I think there's a lot of different situations that you could be in where you're just in a position where maybe you don't trust the leadership and it's time to go, or you do trust the leadership and God is calling you somewhere else.
Sure.
Right?
So, yes. So again, if you had that initial conversation when you were being hired and said, hey, I see I'm getting hired for this position. Love it. Okay, great. Now let's talk about down the line. Let's talk down the line. Are there opportunities to go back to school? Do you guys offer that? How can I equip myself to maybe fit more into this different role? What other opportunities are for growth?
So would you say that it comes down to like purpose?
Yeah, 100% purpose. And again, because if you feel fulfilled, then you're on purpose. If you're just going to get a job, if you're just going to get a paycheck, then you're doing a job.
Yeah.
Then when you encounter any opposition, you're obviously going to be frustrated. You're going to want to leave. Okay, then you're not living on purpose, or what you're doing is not fulfilling you. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So that's why I say, like, you may be on the right bus, but you're maybe in the wrong department, in the wrong ministerial position. Again, I'm just going back and forth from business but here's if you're wise, no matter where you're at, you're being equipped. Now listen to that.
Yeah.
I've done many different things in the past, and I've learned new tools that I always think I have a backpack on me, Jenna. And so I always think, okay, hey, that's a good tool. I put it in my backpack.
I thought you were going to call me Dora.
Oh my gosh. And so I feel like I go from whatever God calls me to the next thing with a bag of tools. And I use those tools in the next thing. Now, I may not use all of them, but I use a lot of them. And that helps me do the next thing.
Yeah, that's great. Is there anything more that you want to add to that? I mean, I think that in itself I think we covered a lot. I mean, there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of different situations that people can be in. But, if you're in a season of stretching and shifting, know that you're not alone. This is holy ground. And we hope today gave you language for what your soul might already be sensing.
Well, the question that I would say, well, not the question, but what I'd say is beware. And what I mean by that is this. The enemy immediately wants to attack you by asking you questions like, well, who are you to want more? Or, what are people going to say if, I'm going to move out of this position and go on to the next thing? All of those things are fear-based.
Yeah.
Don't listen to them. Don't listen to that. Again, I'm a firm believer that God wants you to want more. I do believe that God made us to achieve, right? To grow, to expand. If you look at, God's a creator, so we create things as well. And so I would encourage you to bounce things off of a leader, a mentor, to help you to make sure that you don't fall into, negativity or a mindset of insecurity or something that begins to attack you because maybe you see a job post or maybe you see an opportunity somewhere. You're like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Immediately, as soon as you say, I don't know, that's already doubt. Okay. Listen to this. Hope is uncertain. Faith is certainty. You can hope for things, but when you hope for something, there's doubt in it. I hope I get the job. I hope this happens. There's doubt in that already. But if you say, I have faith, if it's God's will, I'm in. Lord, this is what I want. I want to achieve this. I want to do this. I'm interested in doing that. Then start believing it and start working towards it and having conversations with those that already are in that position, are already doing what you want to do, and equip yourself with the areas that you need to equip yourself in. That'll give you the confidence again and equip you so that you actually get that. So keep walking. You don't have to stay where you've been just to keep others comfortable. That's another big thing.
Yeah.
Right? Well, what is the person next to me going to say, or what is that person going to think? Can I tell you a story? Let me tell you so we can wrap this up. I remember finishing my first ministerial training. It's called a 12-step study we did. And I call it ministerial training because it was such an in-depth, like soul searching, inventory, like looking at my past. What are the things that were, holding me back from, moving forward with my life? There was a lot of past, stuff that I dealt with, trauma, stuff from my childhood, things that I did, all this stuff. And I remember finishing, it was a year-length process of going through just a lot of discovery and God just releasing me from all kinds of crazy stuff from my past. And I remember our pastor leader sitting in that celebration as we're having Chinese food. And there's 12 of us. Listen, 12 guys that went through this thing. And he asked a very important question. You know what it was? He said, what do you want to do next? Jenna, and for you that's listening, my heart was jumping out of my chest because I knew what I wanted. But my heart began to race because I looked around the room and immediately the imposter syndrome kicks in and says, who do you think you are to tell this man that you want to do what he's doing? Listen to that you want to do what he's doing. But everything inside of me was like, dude, I want to do what you're doing. I want to be a pastor. I want to lead people. I want to disciple people. Like, I love this. I was like, if God could pay me to do this, like, I'm in. And I remember I was towards the end, and I remember every guy going and saying what they were saying, but my heart was just pounding. And I remember it got to me, and I'm so grateful that when it got to me and everyone's looking at me because everyone turned to look at Juan, I looked at Pastor Bill. Shout out to Bill Reeser. I love you, man. And I remember him asking me and saying, what do you want to do, Juan? And I looked at him. Sorry, I didn't know this was going to happen. It feels like it was just yesterday. I remember looking at him straight in the eyes and saying, I want to do what you're doing. And I remember how he lit up. He lit up. And he was like, you know what, Juan? You're going to do it. I remember his belief in me. And I felt it. And it felt like the 11 guys, because I was the 12th guy that was in that room, disappeared. And it was just him and I. And to him, if I guarantee he probably felt the same way too, because he was like, that's what I was looking for. I was looking for someone to stand up and say, I want to do what you're doing, because he knew his calling. He knew that he wanted to disciple others. He wanted to, again, duplicate himself, to multiply. And when I answered that, the saying is that the teacher will always appear when the student is ready. And man, I was so good to be on and experience that, with Pastor Bill, who later on, we set a game plan and he equipped me. He trusted me. He invested time, energy with me. He literally did Matthew 28:19-20, taught me everything that he knew, gave me opportunities, took risks on me. And here we are 10 years later, still pastoring people, leading people. And now you, Jen and I, are able to do the same. So keep walking. Don't stay where you've been just to keep others comfortable. Say yes.
Yeah. Amen. That's awesome. Yeah. If you feel like you've outgrown that room,
it's time to move.
Yeah.
Say yes.
Say yes to God. That was great. Awesome. Well, next week, we're diving into a topic that's been coming up again and again in our coaching calls. The burden of being the strong one. Mm-hmm. You're not going to want to miss that one. Until then, keep showing up with honesty and let God meet you right where you are. We'll see you next week.